Eleanor Ward had always believed she understood the world around her. She grew up in a quiet place where the days moved slowly, marked only by the rhythm of chores, changing seasons, and the comfort of familiar faces. But everything changed the day she found herself separated from her travel group during a long journey across the open plains. It happened in a way she could never have predicted. A strong windstorm rolled across the land, thick with dust, turning day into a blur of brown shadows. Eleanor's horse became uneasy, stepping sideways, and when she tried to steady it, the animal jerked free and dashed into the haze. By the time the storm settled, Eleanor was alone. Far from her group and unsure which direction to take, hours passed as she tried to find her way, calling out, hoping someone would answer. What she did not expect was to be discovered by a Lakota hunting party returning to their camp. When the riders approached, their silhouettes grew larger against the fading light, and Eleanor's heart pounded with confusion and worry. She had heard many stories about the people of these plains, most of them told by travelers who barely understood them. Those stories shaped her fears more than facts ever had. Among the riders was Chaska, a tall man with calm but unreadable eyes. When he saw Eleanor standing alone beside her tired horse, he understood at once that she was lost. His people were familiar with travelers who wandered off their path, led astray by storms or the vastness of the land. Some were friendly, others uncertain. And some carried misunderstandings passed from one community to another. Chaska signaled to the others, and they approached Eleanor slowly, giving her space. But Eleanor, unsure of their intentions, stepped back. She held her breath and tried to appear brave, though her hands trembled. She did not know their language, and they did not know hers. The only thing they shared in that moment was caution. Chaska spoke gently to her, his voice low and steady, but Eleanor could only guess what he meant. His tone sounded neither harsh nor threatening. It was simply firm, like someone giving directions to keep a situation calm and clear. Still, Eleanor felt small and uncertain. She did not know if these men planned to help her or take her somewhere she did not wish to go. When her horse shifted nervously, its hooves scraping the ground, Chaska took a small step forward. He lifted one hand in a reassuring gesture, showing she had nothing to fear. But Eleanor's mind, shaped by years of warnings, twisted that moment into something she could not understand. She pulled the reins close and tried to back away. The horse resisted her, tugging against the pressure. Chaska noticed immediately and moved quickly, catching the animal's bridle before it could bolt again. He spoke softly to the horse, calming it with practiced ease. Eleanor was startled by how effortlessly he handled the situation, as though he had been guiding animals his whole life, and perhaps he had. When he turned his attention back to her, his expression shifted. He was not angry, but serious. His voice took on a tone she could interpret even without understanding the words. He wanted her to stop resisting, to trust him long enough to stay safe. The plains were wide and empty. Being alone out here was not only frightening, but dangerous in ways she had never considered. He said something short, a statement that held weight. Eleanor did not know what the exact words meant, but she felt the message behind them. He intended to take responsibility for her safety, whether she liked it or not. It was not a threat, but a promise of control over a situation she no longer had power to manage herself. The firmness in his voice made her swallow hard. In that moment, Eleanor felt as if he were telling her, "You cannot resist me, or I will break down your stubbornness," though of course those were not the real words he used. They were simply the meaning her frightened mind created. Her heart raced, and she wondered what fate awaited her now. The hunters guided her gently toward their camp. Eleanor walked beside her horse, watching Chaska closely. He kept a respectful distance, but remained near enough to ensure she stayed with the group. She felt the weight of unfamiliar eyes on her, not unkind, but curious. She had always lived in a world where she understood how things worked, where she knew her place and what was expected of her. Now, everything felt unknown. The journey to the camp was slow, but steady. As they traveled, Eleanor noticed the land opening up around her. The plains stretched in every direction, touched by evening light. These people knew this land intimately. It shaped their movements, their choices, their lives. She realized how small she truly was here. When the camp came into view, Eleanor saw families sitting near their shelters, children running, elders speaking softly. It did not look like a place of danger. It looked like a community, a home full of everyday sounds and faces. But even that did not settle her heart completely. Chaska spoke to a few people who approached to greet the riders. They looked at Eleanor with questions in their eyes, whispering among themselves. Some smiled in a friendly way. Others simply observed, unsure what to make of her. Chaska then turned back to Eleanor and met her gaze directly. His expression was not harsh, but resolute. It was clear he intended to watch over her and make sure she followed the rules of this unfamiliar place. He seemed to think she might try to escape or put herself in danger, and he was determined not to let that happen. It was then that he spoke again, in that unshakable tone, the one that made Eleanor feel as though he was telling her, "Do not fight this. You must stay." She did not understand the words, only the weight behind them. Eleanor felt a mix of emotions: fear, confusion, frustration, and a strange curiosity she could not ignore. She wondered who this man really was, what kind of life he lived, and why he looked at her with a mix of caution and responsibility. As night settled over the plains, she found herself in a place she had never imagined being, surrounded by people she did not understand, guided by a man whose intentions were still a mystery to her. Yet even in her fear, she could not deny something unexpected. Chaska did not treat her as an enemy. He treated her as someone who needed guidance, someone who might one day understand more than she did now. She did not know that this was only the beginning of a journey neither of them had planned. A journey that would test her courage, reshape her beliefs, and reveal depths in Chaska's heart that he himself had long ignored. For now, all she knew was this: she was far from home, under the watchful eyes of a man who had made a promise she did not yet understand, a promise that would change both of their lives in ways she could not imagine. Eleanor woke the next morning with the soft light of dawn touching the side of her face. For a few moments, she forgot where she was. She expected to hear the voices of her own people, the sound of wagons shifting, or the soft clatter of morning chores. Instead, she heard the calm, steady rhythm of a nearby fire being stirred, along with the distant laughter of children running through the camp. When she opened her eyes fully, she found herself in a small corner space prepared for her the night before. A warm blanket had been placed near her, not too close, but close enough to give comfort. Someone had thought of her well-being, though she was still unsure exactly who. As she sat up, her eyes drifted across the camp. The Lakota people were already awake and moving. Women prepared food, men checked their horses, and older members sat together, sharing quiet conversations. Everything moved with purpose, yet without rush. It felt like a world built on routine and harmony. Eleanor wrapped her arms around her knees and tried to steady her thoughts. Yesterday had been overwhelming. The storm, getting lost, being found by strangers, and now waking in a place she barely understood, all felt unreal. But she knew she had no choice but to face what the new day would bring as she tried to gather her courage. She saw Chaska approaching. He walked with calm steps, not hurried, not hesitant. His expression, as always, was carefully controlled. But there was no anger in his eyes, only focus, and perhaps curiosity. Eleanor's heart tightened. She had spent most of the night thinking about him, about the way he spoke to her, the way he made decisions for her without asking. She still felt intimidated, but she also sensed that he was not unkind. Just firm, extremely firm. When he reached her, he stopped a few steps away, giving her space, greeted her with a brief nod. Eleanor returned a small, unsure nod of her own. Chaska held out a small wooden bowl filled with something warm. He spoke softly, gesturing for her to eat. Eleanor hesitated. She had never eaten food like this before. She didn't know what it was, nor what customs to follow. But her stomach reminded her that she hadn't eaten since yesterday afternoon, and her hunger eventually won. She accepted the bowl with quiet thanks, even though she knew he couldn't understand her words. Still, He seemed to recognize her gratitude from her expression. He stepped back to give her privacy while she ate, but he did not go far. Eleanor noticed he stayed close enough to watch over her. The food was simple, but comforting, made with care. As she ate, she tried to pay attention to the movements of the camp, hoping she could learn something by observing. What surprised her most was the sense of calm around her. Nobody looked at her with anger. Most people simply accepted her presence. Some smiled, some offered polite curiosity, and others continued with their daily routines without paying her much attention at all. Still, the feeling of being a stranger remained heavy. After she finished eating, Chaska approached again. He gestured for her to follow him. Eleanor's first instinct was to hesitate, but something inside reminded her that refusing to move would accomplish nothing.
Ow.
She was in their world now, and understanding Etevin a little might be her only way to find peace. She stood and followed him slowly. Chaska led her toward a group of women who were preparing hides and weaving materials. At first, Eleanor didn't understand why he brought her here, but soon she realized he wanted her to stay where others could watch over her. Not because she was a problem, because she was unfamiliar with the camp's ways and might accidentally walk into a place she wasn't meant to be. The women looked at her with gentle interest. One of them stepped forward, offering a friendly smile. She pointed toward a small stool, inviting Eleanor to sit. Eleanor hesitated, then slowly lowered herself onto it. The woman began demonstrating a simple weaving pattern with her hands, showing each movement carefully. Eleanor blinked in surprise. Was she being taught something? Chaska watched from a short distance, observing both Eleanor and the women. He seemed satisfied that she was in safe company. For the first time since she met him, Eleanor noticed the tension in her shoulders ease just a little. The morning passed slowly. Eleanor tried to mimic the weaving motions, fumbling at first, but gradually improving. The women encouraged her with soft smiles and patient gestures. She felt a faint warmth rising in her chest. Even though she didn't know their language, kindness needed no translation. But her sense of ease was fragile when she accidentally dropped one of the weaving strips. She bent to pick it up and stood too quickly, bumping into a basket that toppled over. The noise startled her, and she gasped. Several people turned toward her. Eleanor's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Chaska, hearing the sound, came quickly. Not running, but with purpose. Eleanor panicked, thinking he would scold her or misunderstand the situation. She tried to explain with nervous motions of her hands, but her words came out unsure. Chaska examined the fallen basket, then glanced at her. His expression remained neutral, lifted the basket and set it back in its place. Then he looked at her again, this time with a softer gaze, as if telling her it was all right that accidents happened. Eleanor's breath steadied. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't react harshly. Instead, he simply reset the situation and stepped back. The moment left her puzzled. Why did he carry himself with such seriousness, yet show quiet patience? When she expected the opposite, she had imagined him harsh, perhaps because fear shaped her earliest impression of him. But each hour she spent here chipped away at that idea. The rest of the day unfolded in a series of small discoveries. Eleanor watched how the people cooperated seamlessly, the way they shared tasks. How children helped their families. How conversations flowed with hand gestures and quiet laughter. It was a world completely different from the one she knew, yet connected by the same threads of everyday life. By midday, Chaska returned again and motioned for her to walk with him. Eleanor followed. She expected him to lead her out of sight, or away from the camp, but instead he brought her toward a peaceful area where the land stretched openly. He pointed to the horizon, then traced a path in the air with his hand. She understood he was showing her where her group had likely gone. Her heart lifted and sank at the same time. Knowing the direction brought comfort, but the distance made her feel lost all over again. Chaska watched her quietly, understanding her emotion without needing words. When she turned to him, he touched his hand lightly to his chest, then toward her, then toward the camp. As if telling her, "You are safe here. Stay. For now, this is the place where you must be." Eleanor looked into his eyes. They held firmness, but also something else, perhaps responsibility. Perhaps a promise she didn't yet understand. Her mind raced with questions she could not ask. The sun began to dip low. painting the sky in colors she had never seen so vividly. The air grew cooler, but the camp remained warm with life as people prepared their evening meals. Eleanor found herself watching them with new eyes. Instead of fear, there was curiosity growing inside her slowly, cautiously, like a sprout pushing through hard soil. Later, as she settled near the fire, wrapped in the same blanket as the night before, she saw Chaska seated near the edge of the camp. He watched the land the way a guardian watches the night. Not in judgment, not in anger, but in steady awareness. Eleanor wondered what stories he carried, what burdens shaped his serious expression, what reasons he had for treating her with firmness, but also unexpected gentleness. She did not know him, yet could not deny that his presence felt strangely grounding. The day had begun with fear and confusion, but it ended with a quiet realization: Chaska was not her enemy. He was not her captor in the way she had once imagined. He was something else, something she could not name yet. And though she still longed for home, she now understood that this new chapter in her life was only beginning. The world she thought she knew was widening, piece by piece. And her journey with these people, less specially with Chaska, was far from over. That night, Eleanor slept lightly, waking often as soft sounds drifted through the camp. Sometimes it was the quiet talk of elders sitting near the fire, sometimes the rustle of horses moving gently in the dark, and sometimes the low sound of the wind passing through the tall grass. Every time she opened her eyes, she reminded herself that she was still far from home. Yet she also noticed something she had not felt the first night. She no longer felt completely afraid. When dawn came again, she stepped outside the shelter area where she had slept and found Chaska already awake. He was always awake early, as if he had been raised to greet the morning before anyone else. He stood near the edge of the camp, watching the sunrise touch the wide land with soft gold. His posture was steady, and even from a distance, Eleanor sensed a deep weight in him that she did not yet understand as she approached him slowly. Chaska turned and nodded in greeting. His face remained calm, but something about his eyes felt gentler today. Eleanor wondered if he had been thinking about her too, about how difficult this adjustment must be for her. Chaska motioned for her to walk with him. She followed, though her heart fluttered with uncertainty. They walked along a small path, leading just outside the camp, where the land opened into soft hills. Chaska pointed at certain plants and said a few words, teaching her their names in his language. She tried to repeat them, earning a faint smile from him when she mispronounced a word. It was the first time she had ever seen him smile, even if only slightly. They continued walking until he paused near a quiet stream. The water was clear enough for Eleanor to see the stones at the bottom. Chaska crouched down and tapped the surface, signaling for her to come closer. She knelt beside him, unsure what he wanted her to see. He dipped his hand into the water and lifted a smooth stone. Then he set it gently on the grass and picked up another stone, darker and less polished. He placed them side by side. Eleanor watched, trying to understand. He placed his hand over his heart, then pointed at the rough stone, then at himself. Eleanor blinked, confused at first, until the meaning slowly shaped itself in her mind. Was he telling her something about himself? Something painful? He lifted the smooth stone next, touched it with his fingertips, and then pointed at her. Eleanor looked from the stones to him, then back again. Chaska seemed to be showing her that she came from a place of peace and calm, like the smooth stone. And maybe he saw himself as the rough one shaped by difficult experiences she did? Not yet, no. She felt a soft ache in her chest. This simple gesture revealed more about him than any words could have. She wished she knew enough of his language to respond, to tell him that she understood at least a little. Chaska picked up the rough stone again and slowly rubbed it against the smooth one. When he lifted it, a small part of its surface looked a bit softer than before. He looked at her as if saying, slowly, over time, even roughness could change. Eleanor swallowed the lump in her throat. She wondered what had shaped him so deeply. She sensed a quiet sadness in him, something he carried alone. When they returned to the camp later, Eleanor noticed for the first time that the people treated Chaska with deep respect. He was not just any man among them. He often guided groups, settled disagreements, and carried himself like someone who had experienced more responsibility than most. But responsibility did not erase grief. She could see that in the way he sometimes stared out at the land, his thoughts far away. Later that day, while helping the women with simple tasks, Eleanor accidentally overheard a few of them speaking in soft tones. Though she did not understand the language fully, she recognized Chaska's name and a tone of sympathy in their voices. She guessed they were talking about someone he had lost. She watched Chaska from across the camp, sitting alone near a small fire. His shoulders curved slightly forward, not in weakness, but in the quiet heaviness of memories. It was then she realized that the firmness he showed her was not meant to control her, but to protect something inside himself, something fragile and hidden. As the day continued, the camp prepared for a gathering in the evening. It seemed to be a time for songs, stories, and shared memories. People brought food, children played by the fires, and the elders took their places in a circle. The gathering felt warm, like a large family coming together for comfort. Eleanor sat at a respectful distance, unsure if she should join but wanting to watch. A young woman came to sit beside her, offering a friendly smile. She handed Eleanor a small piece of cooked corn and pointed to the circle, encouraging her to watch. When the first elder began to speak, his voice carried a rhythm that felt almost musical. Eleanor could not understand the words, but she could feel the meaning in the tone, memories, lessons, the story of how a life unfolded. She noticed that several people turned toward Chaska during the story, nodding gently in acknowledgement. Eleanor wondered if the elder was speaking about Chaska's family, perhaps sharing their memory in a way that honored them. Chaska did not move much. His face stayed calm, but Eleanor noticed his hands clasped tightly in his lap, as though he were holding on to something deep inside. When the storytelling ended, soft music followed. People played simple instruments, creating warm sounds that blended with the night air. Children danced playfully. Some of the women joined them in graceful movements. Even the older men smiled, enjoying the peaceful moment. Eleanor found herself slowly relaxing, feeling a strange sense of belonging she never expected. A few minutes later, Chaska approached her. He seemed slightly unsure, as if he was not used to approaching others for company. He gestured toward a spot closer to the fire, inviting her to join the group instead of watching from the distance. She hesitated. But then she remembered the stones by the stream, the way he had shown her parts of his heart without words. She stood and followed him quietly, sitting near the fire with the others. Eleanor felt warmth spreading through her, not only from the fire itself, but from being welcomed without pressure or conditions. People shared food with her, smiled, and included her in the moment. She felt something shift inside. For the first time since arriving in the camp, she did not feel like a stranger. She glanced at Chaska, who sat nearby. His expression remained steady, but the faint softness in his eyes returned when he noticed her watching him. He looked away quickly, almost shyly, and Eleanor found that surprisingly endearing. The night continued with soft laughter, quiet stories, and the simple joy of being together. Eleanor realized that these people were not the way she had been taught to imagine them. They were gentle, hardworking, and full of heart. Their world was different, but their emotions, hopes, and struggles were the same as any others. As she lay down that night, wrapped again in the warm blanket, she reflected on the day. She had learned more about Chaska without hearing many words from him. She had seen glimpses of his pain, his strength, and the quiet kindness that shaped him. She had also begun to understand something she never thought she would, that being among these people might teach her more about herself than she had ever learned at home. Little did she know, this slow understanding was only the beginning. Her connection with Chaska, still fragile and unspoken, was growing in ways neither of them yet recognized. The next several days passed in a quiet but meaningful rhythm. Eleanor woke each morning to the soft sounds of the Lakota camp beginning its daily life. And each day she noticed something new, something small, but enough to make her feel less like an outsider. Sometimes it was the kindness of the women who guided her hands gently when teaching her a new task. Sometimes it was the joyful laughter of the children who ran past her, waving even if they could not speak her language. And sometimes It was simply the steady presence of Chaska, who always seemed close enough to watch over her without making her feel trapped. She found herself looking for him more often than she expected. Even when he was silent, his presence felt grounding. He had a calmness about him that softened the edges of her worry. She still missed home deeply, but her fear had changed into something quieter, something she could breathe through. One morning, Eleanor followed the women to gather plants near the stream. As they walked, they spoke among themselves, sometimes pointing to the plants and saying their Lakota names. Eleanor listened carefully, repeating what she heard. Her voice caught their attention, and they smiled warmly. Pleased, she was trying. While gathering herbs, she noticed Chaska at a distance, with a group of men tending to horses. He looked focused, his strong hands moving gently as he checked each horse's hooves and tied their reins. Their eyes met for a moment. Eleanor felt a warm flutter in her stomach, a strange but gentle feeling she did not fully understand. Chaska looked away softly but not coldly, almost as if he were unsure what to do with the moment. When she returned to the camp, an older woman approached her with a woven necklace made of thin strands and small beads. The woman placed it around Eleanor's neck carefully and touched Eleanor's cheek with a kind hand. Eleanor's heart filled with warmth. It was a sign of acceptance, a small but powerful gesture. Later that afternoon, Eleanor sat near the fire with a few women, practicing the weaving pattern they had shown her earlier. She was concentrating so hard that she didn't notice Chaska approaching until his shadow fell over the ground beside her. She looked up quickly. Chaska said a word she didn't know, pointing gently to the pattern she was weaving. His tone sounded like approval. Eleanor smiled shyly. She wanted to say thank you, but she wasn't sure how to say it in his language. Instead, she nodded, hoping he understood. A moment later, one of the children ran toward them, holding a small carved figure. He handed it to Chaska, who examined it with interest. Then, surprisingly, Chaska handed it to Eleanor. She blinked in surprise and looked up at him. Chaska said something soft, his voice low and sincere. Eleanor did not understand the words, but she felt the meaning. He wanted her to have it as a simple gift. The small figure was shaped like a bird with wings folded gently. Eleanor held it close to her heart. Something inside her shifted again. The rough, distant man she had met in her fear-filled first hours was slowly revealing a gentler side, one she never expected. That evening, a gentle breeze moved through the camp as people gathered for their nightly activities. Eleanor sat near the fire, watching the flames dance. Chaska sat a short distance away, but every so often their eyes met. She wasn't sure what it meant, but she didn't look away quickly anymore. Instead, she held the moment, letting it warm her. As the days went on, Eleanor learned to help more around the camp. She carried water, sorted herbs, and even helped with simple cooking tasks. She observed how quietly and respectfully the Lakota people moved through their days. It was a world built on cooperation. Everyone had a place and a purpose. Chaska watched her progress with a certain pride, though he hid it behind his calm expressions. Sometimes he stepped forward to help her adjust her grip on a tool or show her how to do something more efficiently. His presence was never forceful, always patient, always steady. One afternoon, the sky darkened with heavy clouds. A soft rain began to fall, sending people hurrying to gather their things. Eleanor stood beneath a shelter, watching as the rain created ripples in the puddles forming on the ground. Chaska walked over to her, water droplets glistening in his hair. He motioned for her to follow him to another part of the camp where the shelter was stronger. They walked side by side, the rain falling gently around them. Eleanor looked up at him, noticing how peaceful he appeared, even in the storm. She wanted to ask him so many questions about his life, his family, the sadness she sensed in him, but she couldn't find the words, not with the language barrier, and not yet with her courage. When they reached the larger shelter, they sat down together, both watching the rain. The sound was calming. For a while, they didn't speak at all. They didn't need to. The silence between them felt comfortable, like a space built on understanding rather than fear. Finally, Chaska reached into a small pouch and pulled out 2 stones, one rough, one smooth. Eleanor recognized them instantly. Her heart softened. He placed them gently in her hands and pointed to the rough stone again, then to himself. Then he pointed at the smooth stone and at her. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming tenderness of the gesture. She understood no more clearly than before that he saw her as someone who brought calm and gentleness into a world where he had carried too much heaviness. She placed the smooth stone over his hand. Letting him know she wished the same for him, Chaska looked at her, a quiet surprise flickering in his expression. For a long moment, they simply sat facing each other, sharing a silent understanding. When the rain finally stopped, Eleanor returned the stones to him carefully. He nodded slowly, as if touched by her response. As the days blended into weeks, the bond between Eleanor and Chaska grew not with sudden moments but with small gestures, shared tasks, and quiet truths. Their connection was built on respect, trust, and the tiny moments that passed between them without words. One evening, as the sun set in bright shades across the sky, Eleanor saw Chaska watching her from across the camp. His expression was thoughtful, almost soft. For the first time, Eleanor sensed something deeper growing in him, something he may not fully understand himself. She also began to feel it. Inside her, a warmth, a sense of belonging, pulled toward a man who had once frightened her but now stood as a source of comfort and quiet. Strength. Their journey was still uncertain, their futures still separate in many ways. But something important had changed. Eleanor was no longer simply a lost traveler among strangers. She was becoming part of their world, part of their days, and somehow, without realizing it, part of Chaska's heart. And although neither of them spoke it aloud, both felt that their story had reached a turning point, one that would shape everything that came next. Days continued to pass, and the rhythm of the camp became something Eleanor understood almost without thinking. She knew when the children would run out laughing each morning, the women would gather for weaving or food preparation, and when the men would return after long hours of work. She had become familiar with the sounds, the scents, the faces, and even the land itself. What she did not realize at first was how naturally she had grown into these routines. She had arrived feeling lost and afraid, but now she moved through the camp with a sense of calm she would never have imagined on that first day. She felt safe, she felt useful, and she felt seen. But life has its own way of changing direction just when a person becomes comfortable. One afternoon, a small group of travelers arrived near the camp. They were peaceful, not part of the Lakota band, but familiar with their ways. Their clothes and supplies were similar to those of the settlers Eleanor once traveled with. When the camp welcomed them for a short rest, they spoke with a mixture of curiosity and warmth. Eleanor's heart shook the moment she saw them. She had not seen anyone from outside the Lakota camp for weeks. It was like seeing a piece of her old life suddenly appear in the middle of her new one. She stood quietly, unsure what to feel. When the travelers noticed her, they were shocked. One of them stepped closer, recognizing her name when she introduced herself. He told her gently that her original group had survived the storm and had passed through a safer trail farther east. They had looked for her until they could no longer continue, believing she had been lost somewhere along the plains. Hearing this felt like a door unlocking. Inside her chest, one she had kept shut without realizing it. Everything came rushing back. Her home, her family, the familiar world she had left behind. She suddenly remembered who she had been before all of this. The travelers offered to guide her back to the nearest settlement, where she could reunite with her group or send word to her family. Eleanor's breath caught. She had wanted this since the day she arrived at the camp. It should have made her feel relieved, excited, grateful, but something unexpected happened. She hesitated. The hesitation was small at first, quiet pause inside her heart, but it grew. It grew because she realized she had built a life here, however temporary. She had learned, grown, and changed. She had become a part of something larger than herself. And then there was Chaska. When he learned that Eleanor had the chance to return to her people, he did not show any dramatic reaction. Instead, he became even quieter than usual. His posture stayed upright and calm, but something hidden in his eyes shifted, a softness mixed with something deeper, maybe a little sadness he tried to hide. That evening, the camp gathered for a simple meal. Eleanor sat among the women, listening to their gentle voices, but her mind kept drifting toward Chaska. He sat near the fire, speaking softly with a few elders. He seemed calm, but Eleanor sensed he was thinking about her departure. After a while, he stood up and walked toward her. The women around Eleanor understood before she did, and stepped away kindly, giving them space. Chaska looked at her with a calm expression, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. He spoke softly in his own language, but Eleanor felt she understood even without knowing the exact words. He pointed to the travelers, then to her heart, then to the open land beyond the camp. He was telling her that she was free to go, that this was her chance to return to the life she came from. Eleanor swallowed hard. She wanted to tell him everything she felt, the gratitude, the confusion, the warmth, the way he had helped her change. But the words tangled inside her. She looked at him with a trembling smile. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Chaska did something she'd never expected. He reached into the small pouch he always carried and took out the two stones, the rough one and the smooth one. He placed them in Eleanor's hands gently, closing her fingers around them. Her breath caught. This was more than a gesture. It was a message. He was giving her the reminder of their shared moment at the stream, of everything he had shown her about his heart and how she had softened it. She looked up at him, and his eyes held something new. Not fear, not tension, something like acceptance. A quiet understanding that her path and his were not meant to stay together forever. The next morning came quietly. Eleanor packed her few belongings, the bird carving, the woven necklace, the stones from Chaska. The travelers were preparing to leave, their horses ready for the long journey ahead. The entire camp gathered to say goodbye. Many of the women touched Eleanor's hands, offering gentle smiles and small blessings. Children waved, calling her name. She felt tears sting her eyes. She had not expected to care so much. Finally, she turned to Chaska. He stood a few steps away, his expression steady but thoughtful. She walked toward him slowly, holding the stones. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the world around them soft and quiet. Eleanor placed her hand over her heart, then gently touched the stones in her pocket. Chaska understood. She was telling him that she would carry the memory of all he had given her. Chaska nodded once, slow and respectful. His voice was low when he spoke his last words to her, but she understood them clearly. You are strong. You choose your own path. Eleanor felt a deep ache in her chest, but also a strange peace. She stepped back, then joined the travelers. As they began to ride away, she looked over her shoulder one last time. Chaska stood where she had left him, tall and steady, watching her with calm eyes that held no anger, only acceptance. The land stretched ahead of her, wide and full of possibility. Eleanor realized she was not the same person who had arrived here in fear and confusion. She had grown into someone who understood resilience, compassion, and the deep beauty of culture and connection. Chaska had not broken her, nor had he tried to. Instead, he had helped her find strength she never knew she had. And she, in return, had touched a tender part of his heart he kept hidden from the world. Their paths had crossed in the most unexpected way. And though they now walked separate roads, their story would remain within them quiet, meaningful, and unforgettable. As the camp faded into the distance behind her, Eleanor held the stones in her hand. One rough, one smooth. A reminder of everything she had learned, everything she had survived, and everything she had become. Her journey was moving forward now. But she would always carry a part of this place and a part of Chaska with her.